Have you ever noticed that the more grounded you become, the more unstable others act around you? That as soon as you begin to heal, set boundaries, or walk in self-respect, certain people start pulling away, acting offended, or claiming you've changed? What if this emotional turbulence isn't a sign you're doing something wrong, but that you're finally becoming someone they can no longer control? If you're watching this, you are not here by accident. You're likely a rare soul, an old soul, the kind of person who has always felt things more deeply than most, who absorbs what others ignore, who stays silent, not because you're weak, but because your intelligence speaks in quiet observation. You've probably spent years being the one who gives, adapts, explains, and sacrifices your own needs just to keep the peace. But something has shifted. You're waking up. And that awakening has created a ripple, not just in your life, but in every relationship around you. Carl Jung believed that when the self begins to emerge from the unconscious, it doesn't just change the individual, it reveals the hidden dynamics of the collective. Your rise acts like a spiritual spotlight, and that light exposes what was once comfortably hidden: the quiet manipulation, the conditional love, the codependent roles, the masks. You're not imagining it. You're seeing things more clearly because you're finally seeing them as they are, not through the lens of your old wounds, but through the clarity of your healing. But here's the strange part. The resistance you're experiencing isn't about your evolution. It's about their discomfort. Your transformation becomes a mirror. It reflects back to others all the places in themselves they haven't yet faced. So, what looks like rejection is actually projection. What feels like abandonment is actually resistance to their own growth. And what hurts the most, the distance, the silence, the sudden coldness, is often the echo of their unspoken fear, that they no longer have control over your spirit. So now comes the real question. What will you do with this clarity? Will you shrink yourself to stay loved? Or will you let the truth complete its cycle, no matter who falls away in the process? This is not a breakdown. This is a breakthrough. You are not losing people. You are losing illusions. You are not becoming arrogant. You are becoming aware. And most importantly, you are not destroying harmony. You are finally choosing inner peace over outer approval. This is the beginning of your rise, and it will not only change your life, but it will also reveal the truth about everyone else's. It didn't happen all at once. It was in the small compromises you made to avoid conflict, the way you said it's okay when it wasn't, the way you dimmed your light in rooms that felt threatened by your brilliance. In relationships, at work, even in your own family, you learned how to shrink yourself, not because you lacked power, but because your power made others uncomfortable. And so you became agreeable, apologetic, invisible. You performed a quieter version of yourself, one that smiled even when something inside you wanted to scream. You wore a mask to survive. But what if I told you that they didn't love you? They loved the mask? Carl Jung called this mask the persona, the part of you that adapts to the outer world to gain acceptance. It's not fake, but it's incomplete. It's the self you create to be loved in a world that punishes authenticity. And for many rare souls like you, this mask is built not out of deceit, but out of pain, out of necessity, out of early experiences where your truth was too loud, your emotions too much, your instincts too piercing. You learned early that love was conditional and that being good meant being small. Think about it. When you were the one who always said yes, who never asked for too much, who forgave quickly and didn't speak up, how did people treat you? They praised you for being kind, humble, easy to get along with. But was it kindness? Or was it self-erasure? Was it humility, or was it fear? And now that you've begun to rise, now that you've stopped over-explaining and started reclaiming your voice, have you noticed how quickly that praise turned into distance, defensiveness, or even resentment? This is the paradox of transformation. You're not becoming someone new. You're becoming someone real. And the moment you shift out of performance and into presence, the people who were only comfortable with your compliance begin to recoil. Why? Because your empowerment exposes their dependence on your weakness. Because as long as you stayed small, they didn't have to face their own shadows. A woman once shared that as soon as she started enforcing boundaries with her family, they told her she was selfish and changing for the worse. A man said that after years of bending over backwards for friends who never reciprocated, he finally said no and was ghosted. These aren't isolated stories. They are patterns. Because when you stop playing the role, you threaten the entire script. And people would rather demonize your growth than question their own comfort in your suppression. But what if your silence was never kindness? It was a survival reflex. What if your constant yes was a cry to belong? And what if the love you thought you received wasn't for who you are, but for how well you contorted yourself to meet others' needs? Jung warned that if we live only in our persona, we remain puppets to external validation. But when the persona begins to crack, when we let our real self emerge, that's when we find not just truth, but freedom. So the real question becomes, are you willing to lose the approval of those who only loved your weakness in order to meet the version of yourself that no longer needs permission to exist? Your transformation is not betrayal, it is a return. And if some cannot love you without your chains, they never loved you at all. There comes a moment in every rare soul's life when the world you carefully held together begins to crack. It starts subtly at first, like a hairline fracture in the glass of your identity. Then, one day, something inside you snaps. But here is the shocking question almost no one ever asks. What if the moment you thought would destroy you was actually the moment you came into existence? Most people think their breaking point was a failure, a weakness, an unraveling. But for those with a deep inner life, that breaking point was an initiation. It was the collapse of the small self you were forced to become in order to survive. The self that apologized for everything. The self that lived for approval. The self that believed being hurt was easier than being alone. Jung said that when the ego becomes too narrow to contain the truth of who you are, life will shatter it for you, not to punish you, but to free you. Think back to your own rupture. Maybe it was the betrayal you never saw coming. Maybe it was the friend who disappeared without explanation. Maybe it was the partner whose silence felt like a knife. Or maybe it was something quieter. Waking up one morning with the heavy realization that you no longer recognize the person in the mirror. These moments do not just wound you, they expose you. They pull back the persona you wore so convincingly that even you believed it. A woman once shared that after 20 years of being the peacemaker in her marriage, her husband told her she was too emotional and too sensitive. Instead of shrinking again, something in her snapped. She walked out of the room and never emotionally returned. That snap was not anger, it was awakening. A man described how losing a long-time job broke him to the point he felt empty. But in that emptiness, he discovered the first honest question he had ever asked himself: what do I want? That question became the doorway to a career and identity he never would have explored if life had not forced him to face his own inner void. Do you see the pattern? The breaking point is never the end of you. It is the end of the version of you that was built on silence, fear, and compliance. Jung believed that the psyche uses rupture as a form of sacred disruption. When your outer world collapses, your inner world is finally revealed. The betrayal was not just betrayal, it was the spotlight that illuminated your neglected self-worth. The silence was not just silence, it was the echo that showed you how often you abandoned your own voice. The disappointment was not just disappointment, it was the symbolic death of the small identity that could no longer contain your strength. So here is the real question. What if the worst moment of your life was not a breaking, but a breaking open? What if the identity you lost was never truly yours? What if the pain you felt was your real self pushing through the cracks, demanding to breathe? When the old ego collapses, something extraordinary happens. The authentic self begins to rise. Not all at once, not dramatically, but quietly, steadily, like dawn spreading through a dark room. Your preferences change, your boundaries sharpen, your tolerance for disrespect falls to zero. You stop chasing those who do not choose you. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop performing and start existing. And slowly, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Your breaking point was not your destruction, it was your birth. Healing doesn't always look peaceful. Sometimes it looks like silence after years of explaining. Sometimes it looks like walking away without guilt. Sometimes it looks like saying no and meaning it. But here's a question no one dares to ask. What if your healing is the very thing that threatens those who once depended on your pain? At first, you think healing is just about feeling better, less anxious, less reactive, more whole. But something strange begins to happen when you change. People start treating you differently, not always better. Some grow cold, some mock your boundaries, some accuse you of changing like it's a crime. The very people who once told you to get stronger now seem uncomfortable when you finally do. Why? Because healing is not just self-care, it is self-return. And when you return to yourself, you stop playing the role others assigned to you. You no longer chase after their approval with trembling hands. You no longer beg for clarity from people who benefit from your confusion. You no longer apologize for the space you take up or the voice you reclaim. This shift may seem invisible at first, but make no mistake, it is loud in the psychic realm. And those who manipulated you, even unconsciously, can feel it. A woman who used to fawn in every conversation with her mother suddenly says, "I'm not available for guilt anymore." Her mother doesn't applaud. She attacks. A man who always tolerated passive-aggressive jabs from his brother finally responds with, "That's not funny, that's hurtful." His brother doesn't thank him. He retreats. A daughter who always kept the peace at family dinners begins to speak truths that shake the table. She is no longer invited. You see, your wounds were useful to them. Your silence made their dominance easier. Your people-pleasing made their manipulation seamless. Your shame was the leash they used to keep you close. Carl Jung called this the moment of shadow integration, the act of meeting the disowned parts of yourself and welcoming them back. When you reclaim your anger, it becomes a boundary. When you reclaim your grief, it becomes clarity. When you reclaim your intuition, it becomes protection. And when you bring these fragments home, something profound happens. You become whole. And a whole person cannot be controlled. Your healing confuses them. Your silence terrifies them. Your calm makes them spiral. Because suddenly, you're not reacting the same way. You don't flinch at their comments. You don't explain yourself to their projections. You don't try to rescue their discomfort. You sit in your truth. And that stillness is louder than any scream you've ever given them. They are no longer dealing with the version of you that needed them. They are now facing the version of you that remembers who you are. So here is the real question. What if your healing is not meant to make everyone love you? What if it is meant to reveal who never did? Not, everyone is ready to meet the real you, the healed you, the clearer you, the I don't accept this anymore you. But that's not your problem to solve. It's their illusion to confront. Your healing is not a betrayal. It is a mirror. And to those who built a connection through your suffering, you are now dangerous. It doesn't begin with a dramatic exit. It begins quietly, with one missed call you don't return, one text you don't explain, one old story you no longer defend. Then something radical happens. The energy shifts, and those who once held power over you begin to sense it slipping. But here's a question most people never ask. What if the real power was never in their hands, only in your attention? In daily life, you might not even notice the exact moment it changes, but it does. You used to feel a subtle dread before replying to that friend who constantly guilt-tripped you. You used to rehearse your words before speaking to that family member who always found a way to shame you. You used to question yourself after every encounter with the coworker who meant well but left you doubting your sanity. Until one day, you stop playing along, you stop justifying your boundaries, you stop responding to subtle digs, you stop over-explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. That's the power shift. Carl Jung described this as the reversal of psychic energy, a moment when the life force that once poured outward toward pleasing, proving, and pacifying finally returns to your own inner center. It's not just emotional clarity, it's alchemical. When you stop feeding the system collapses. Suddenly, they no longer have access to the version of you that tolerated breadcrumbs. They only see the version that now recognizes themselves as the feast. This reversal is unsettling to people who only knew how to engage with their unhealed self. And in real life, it shows up in eerily familiar ways. That ex who once played hot and cold now sends you "just thinking of you" messages at midnight. That parent who used guilt to control you suddenly plays the victim when you set limits. That colleague who used to gossip about your work now wants to catch up for coffee. But here's the pattern. When you no longer feed the loop, they don't know what to do with themselves, because their power was never rooted in truth. It was rooted in your unconscious participation. This is not revenge. This is retrieval. You are not ghosting them. You are retrieving the parts of yourself you once gave away just to belong. You are no longer negotiating your worth at tables built on conditional love. You are walking back to your own throne. And what happens next is often the most shocking. They change tactics, from charm to chaos, from closeness to cruelty, from praise to punishment. Why? Because people who lost control over you will often rebrand their manipulation as your betrayal. But Jung warned us, those who cannot individuate, who cannot meet the truth of their own shadow, will project it onto those who grow. Your evolution becomes their discomfort, your clarity becomes their confusion, your boundaries become their blame. So here is the deeper question. How many of your past connections were not love at all, just power, disguised as intimacy? The moment you stop explaining yourself to people who benefit from your guilt, you become sovereign. The moment you stop absorbing others' shame as your responsibility, you become free. The moment you stop reacting, chasing, defending, rescuing, you become untouchable. You are no longer playing their game. You are no longer on their board. And once the game stops, so does their illusion of power. She no longer asks for permission. She no longer waits to be chosen. Something irreversible has shifted. But here's the question most people never stop to ask. What if your liberation is not just personal growth, but a direct threat to everything that kept you small? There is a moment in a woman's life when the old mirrors stop working, the ones that once reflected her worth based on her beauty, her compliance, or how well she played the caretaker. One day, she walks past those mirrors, and they no longer define her. The comments that used to keep her doubting now feel silent. The shame she once wore like skin becomes unrecognizable. The old version of her, the one who tolerated neglect, chased love, and accepted crumbs, has died quietly. In her place is someone they never thought would survive. This is not a glow-up for applause. This is the emergence of the self, as Jung would call it, a psychological and spiritual rebirth. The woman who rises from the ashes of abandonment, betrayal, and self-abandonment is not seeking revenge. She is seeking wholeness. She is no longer fighting for a seat at someone else's table. She is building a life that does not require validation to exist. In the real world, she is the single mother who no longer apologizes for her strength. She is the middle-aged woman who leaves a loveless marriage and starts her own business. She is the quiet soul who stops tolerating microaggressions in the workplace and sets unapologetic boundaries. She is the woman who starts dressing for herself, speaking for herself, living for herself. And the people who once dismissed her feel that shift like an earthquake. Because they counted on her self-doubt, they depended on her guilt, her people-pleasing, her silence. But now, her presence carries weight. Her words carry an edge. Her no is a complete sentence. Jung taught that the self emerges only when the persona, the mask worn to survive, dissolves. That mask was once her protection. But now, her truth is, she no longer performs for the male gaze. She no longer diminishes her intelligence to be liked. She no longer contorts herself to fit into systems that were never built for her power. And that kind of woman? She disrupts entire family systems, entire cultural narratives. Because here's the terrifying truth for them. They never thought she would wake up. They never thought she would choose herself. They never thought she would remember who she was before the world told her who to be. So let me ask you, have you ever noticed how quiet it gets when you stop explaining? Have you felt the subtle panic in others when you refuse to play the emotional caretaker? When will you no longer apologize for your evolution? That silence you hear is not rejection. It is the sound of you returning to yourself, not the broken girl who begged to be seen, but the woman who sees herself so clearly that she no longer needs to be understood to feel real. You are not difficult. You are not selfish. You are awakening. And for those who built their power on your insecurity, that will always be the most dangerous thing about you. You don't owe them an explanation. You don't owe them a performance. You don't even owe them your presence. Because your comeback was never about them in the first place. It was about coming home to the parts of yourself you were once taught to exile. There comes a moment in every healing journey when the desire to prove something dies, when the need to be seen by those who overlooked you dissolves into something far more powerful: self-recognition. At first, you may have thought your transformation would feel like a standing ovation. Finally becoming strong, whole, and self-possessed would earn you applause from those who once doubted you. But the deeper truth is this: your rise will rarely be celebrated by the people who watched you fall. Because your healing rewrites the narrative they depended on. When you no longer carry the identity of the wounded one, the fragile one, the easy-to-control one, you unmake the version of reality they were invested in. This is not revenge. This is individuation, and it is sacred. Carl Jung called individuation the process of becoming whole, of integrating the shadow, dissolving the persona, and embodying the self. It is a journey that requires you to descend into the unconscious, confront your wounds, and re-emerge with your own authority. Not borrowed, not projected, yours. And when you begin to live from that place, something astonishing happens. Your life no longer revolves around who hurt you. It revolves around who you are becoming. You are no longer the daughter trying to earn her father's love. You are no longer the partner shrinking yourself to feel chosen. You are no longer the friend who keeps abandoning your truth to maintain peace. That version of you was real. She was necessary. She survived what she needed to. But she is not your ending. She is the soil from which your true self now blooms. Your comeback, then, is not an act of retaliation. It is a return to the woman you were before the world told you who to be, a return to the voice you silenced, to the boundaries you dissolved, to the work you outsourced. And in that return, you are not trying to win anyone back. You are no longer performing in hopes of being finally seen. You are walking a different path now, one that does not require an audience. Real-life transformation looks like peace instead of people-pleasing, silence instead of over-explaining, leaving the room without guilt, saying no without rehearsing why. It looks like choosing a quiet, aligned life over a loud, performative one. And that shift will confuse those who only knew the earlier chapters. Let it. Because your story was never meant to stay in the pain, it was meant to pass through it. And what emerges on the other side is not a version of you who needs their approval. It is the version your younger self prayed you would become. So if they say you've changed, let them. If they say you're different now, thank them. They are not witnessing a betrayal of your past. They are witnessing the embodiment of your healing. And while they may miss the version of you who needed them, they were never supposed to keep her. She grew, she remembered, and now she walks forward not to prove anything, but to live everything she once believed was impossible. That is your sacred comeback, and it no longer belongs to them. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.